Chapter 40. Liberation Day 5. Navari, we really should stop meeting like this, she snickered as Ogeron held the door open for her. Meeting someone at a privately owned hotel 5 days in a row, Ogeron said while closing and locking the door behind her. People are already starting to talk. 2 days. Let's not make matters worse than they are. I shouldn't be long. We finished the deliberations last night. I'm just here to finalize the arrangements. 5 days, he countered. We keep to galactic standard days at Adyarxie's request. Speaking of her, is it safe to assume Her Majesty is downstairs preparing? She's running behind. She could feel that Ogeron was upset. He didn't understand what her role was in these meetings. If he did, he'd be less concerned about her dietary needs and perceived lack of rest. Adyarxie will be with you once she's done eating, Ogeron said as he led her to the elevator. The Praetorian Prefect has requested you to join an expedition to Gaffin, Navari said, and I looked into that wayward Pharisine girl for you. You should be receiving information on both in a little while. She took the elevator to the basement. Ketz's most recent prediction weighed heavily on her. While checking to see what effect the Colmion incursion may have under the current terms of their agreement, it seemed favorable, but the Kaylani Dominion was still expected to fall, and the Fellowship was still somehow involved. It was maddening. Their military strength would be bolstered by granting those worlds to Kalmia, even if they refused to share their technology or agree to be ruled by the MNF Council. The Kalmians had agreed to abandon their expansionist tendencies far too easily. Had they also foreseen the fall of Kaylani II and expected to exploit it? There was a sufficient enough Lamentic presence in the area to prevent that. Navari had found Lady Darkseid to be rather easy to get along with. She accepted her role in the return of Kalmia, and worked to resolve the issue promptly. She had hoped they could broker an enduring peace with her. If Azuri and Aisha failed to convince Ogeron to leave the system now instead of accompanying the Gaffin expedition, that was unlikely. Ketsa had warned her not to involve herself in the decision-making process. The door slid open. A chair and table had been moved to the basement since the last time she'd been here. Spending hours in meditative trance was rough on muscles and joints alike. Navari needed help getting to her feet after their first session. Putting down some cushions on the second occasion did help a bit, but the chair was a welcome sight. She walked over and made herself comfortable. It looked like it had been brought down from elsewhere in the hotel. She probably had that polite bovine boy Bruno bring it down while Lady Darkseid was sleeping. An assortment of large throw pillows marked her spot on the other side of the room. She was curious about the bowl's content but didn't dare ask. It was better not to pry. Every nation, even Cletheria, had their secrets. Honestly, the function of the white rabbit sitting in her lap, when it wasn't hopping around her mindscape, was far more intriguing. Whatever it really was, it seemed to be reducing the psychic stress on her. None of this would be possible without her. Being able to telepathically communicate at this range was unheard of, but a telepathic link relayed through people in different star systems. Navari would rather be working with her than against her. Balrath. A solitary satellite within the depths of the vastness of space, sprang into action. A small pocket of space deep within its core began to fold, redirecting its output. The distress call it was sending was automated. Gaffin Station stood just outside the border of Kaylani space, at the outermost edge of Xynon territory. Until his orchestrated demise on Hyrule, he'd been known as Labarth. He traded in his blind elderly frame for a new vessel containing a backup of each of his memories. The soul catcher had served him well. His cured eyes had been preserved. One was implanted within his new body, the other granted to his daughter. He tended an ancient tree which was a physical representation of both the past and every possible future. The chamber which housed the tree had been sending a signal to hologram transmitters within Kaylani space. The chamber was now engulfed in unnatural darkness. They have a name, the last sliver of primordial darkness. They are called Najrael. How many of them he'd destroyed before they started cutting the power relays he couldn't say. They burned within the mystical light emanating from his spacesuit. His powers would allow him to continue fighting for some time. He could generate his own air and water, but eventually fatigue would win this war. It would take 2 days for a ship to arrive. Could he endure that long? Sleep is death. Kali. The Midnight Fellowship once consisted of 4 factions. The Acrididae dynasty fell with the Loctarian extermination, leaving a power vacuum. As part of their charter, the Fellowship couldn't go to war. Instead, they'd fracture into individual factions and reform once the war was over. Kalmia refused to be bound by these terms or officially join the Midnight Fellowship. Under Cletharian threat, they had hammered out an agreement over the course of lengthy negotiation. The Kimseti controlled worlds bordering the Gyron star cluster. While technically part of the parliamentary flock, they refused to involve themselves in fellowship politics. They left that up to the Irinarax, who would be the Colmians' new neighbors once they finalized the agreement. The Colmian overlord refused to accept the agreement unless their ancestral homeworld was returned to them, which had been renamed to Nirvana and was now the capital of the fellowship. The Pharisine of the Triad Confederacy and the Denaric Nation, which included the Shega world of Ora, refused to budge. They were at an impasse that couldn't be resolved by psionic meddling or Cletharian force. If they hoped for an enduring peace, they had to find their own path. Rashval, you speak for the Denaric. Cyril, you're here to represent the interests of the Triad. Overmind. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce your name. I need to rest, Cully yawned. If you can't reach a compromise by the time I return, I'll just instruct the Cletharians to open fire and leave once Nirvana is split down the middle. She was bluffing, or at least she thought she was. They couldn't really do that, could they? The mindscape shifted as she created a doorway into a private chamber within the false reality. You coming? Cully asked the rabbit as she handed control of the universe map to the other participants. The silver-dyed white rabbit hopped past her through the door. Once it was closed, it vanished behind them. The setting of the secondary mindscape had been chosen by Cyanide. It looked like the cliffside cavern where they'd spent their first night together. I've enjoyed petting you, Cully smiled warmly. I've been enjoying sitting in your lap, Cyan said as she took on her natural form. Do you think they're starting to suspect there's a Lamentic spying on them yet? Not a chance, Cully laughed. With all that posturing and arguing, there's no time left for being observant. Memories, Cyan sighed as she got comfortable in the Flanix skin rug. From my perspective, it just feels like you're playing with my hair, but for you it depends on which memory of furs you're holding in your mind while you're stroking that rabbit. What makes you think I'm not remembering playing with your hair too? Cully teased. I meant on top of my head, Cyan smirked. I didn't, Cully laughed. I'll remember that, princess, Cyan giggled. I had a hard time pinpointing you today, but you feel closer, Cully noted. I had business at Yarrow's today. It took longer than I expected. I'm visiting with Briar Vishon tonight. She always needs a little personal attention after visiting Gain and Nascali. Vishon. Didn't she say, the most violent conflicts in history ended the moment a woman spread her legs? Cully asked. That would be the head of her house, Luna. Briar is unperfect like me. I'm sure she would have had her way with Gainan by now if she wasn't. Does anyone actually want to be part of that program? Cully asked as she snuggled up beside her. Not for at least 50 years, Cyan sighed. Do you really think you have a resolution? I think so, Cully said apprehensively. I'm just not ready to say anything yet. I think he was targeted and I'm trying to stay off their radar until I'm ready. Just a little hint, Cyan pleaded. Cully held up her black tail between them and extended her stinger. It's not just my clit. No, it's my favorite fidget toy, Cyan taunted, but it might break your concentration. If it does work and you ended up pregnant with a son who can continue the unperfect program. Cully trailed off. You don't have anything to worry about, Cyan cooed. I'm not going to let your stripes go to waste. I may not get jealous, but you signed your body over to me and I plan on putting it to good use. I'm looking forward to it, Cully leaned forward to kiss her, but it didn't feel right. I know, Cyan sighed. Relying on memories is a poor substitute. Stop distracting me. This is important, Cully said as her tails thumped against the side of the bedding. Yes, Princess Kavaza, Cyanide smiled playfully while trying to look serious. Do you want out of the unperfect program? I mean, if you have a son? I've had so many new experiences and I was thinking. Cully fell silent as a pained look passed across her Tejmare's face. I don't know, Cyan said just above a whisper. If it happens, I'll think about it then. I can't entertain the possibility a moment before that. I can't afford to. I understand, Cully said sadly. Before I get us both depressed, Cyanide smiled playfully, how about sharing some of these experiences of yours? The more vivid the memory, the better. Okay, Cully blushed. Where did we leave off yesterday? The Shega and the Pharisine on the balcony, Cyan said merrily. After we were done there, we went to an anonymous sex club. Everyone wears masks and uses fake names. Bajarin and I went to Shiga's. I went all out, skin dye and all. Dressing up like you're a different species is pretty popular there, but not in the events. That's well. Actually, it probably depends on the event. Cully blushed. I signed up for the next event without even knowing what it was. I got pretty lucky, even if I did end up getting in a fight and paralyzed for a while. What? Cyan said in dismay. It's okay. Strawberry and some Kimseti porn star helped take care of it. He said he did horror porn, I think. Their tails are prehensile too short though. We gave him the nickname Pendulum. Slow down, Cyan interrupted. Are you okay now? Yeah, sorry if I scared you. I'll try to take it slower. The fight was over before it got started. I took more of a beating from the fucking. Cully shrugged. That's my princess, Cyan laughed. Quick and brutal again? I've been taking daily jogs as endurance training, Cully smiled. Not that I needed any stamina to deal with them. I used to pretend you were right there running right next to me. Why'd you stop? Cyan asked. Ojeran started running with me. It was nice of him, but the sound of his feet slapping against the ground and his tail dragging on the floor breaks the illusion. Just picture me running with both of you. Cyan smiled. I'd rather imagine you were doing something else with the two of us, Cully sighed. Princess Kivaza. Cyanide said with mock scorn and a playful smile. If I can get you out of that stupid breeding program, Cully grumbled. Don't push, Cyan cautioned. Just let me live vicariously through you, till then. Okay. It would just be fun to take you out for a night on the town, no restrictions. I don't know, Cyan teased. Do you think there would still be a town standing when we're done? Cully blushed brightly. It's story time. Cyan goaded, and I'm still waiting. I don't know about this one, Cully teased. I'm technically going interspecies with anyone I have sex with, but some are a little further past the borders than others, and I was drawing pretty far outside the lines that night. Maybe my sex trainer was right. Going interspecies is like using a dildo with a new shape. Once you get past the idea that there's a body attached, it's all the same. This better be worth the build-up, Cyan snickered. You already said something about some Kimseti porn star. And I'm still here. They're eyeless, use sonar, and have leathery wings. I don't see how much weirder it can get than that. What does their cock even look like? It looks just the same as a Terran actually, Cully shrugged. But with his sonar he could use it like a tuning fork. Not bored, Cyan grinned. The Elysian was more of a challenge to get comfortable with. He was like getting screwed with an icicle. His was kinda pretty actually. He was my first round and liked it rough. I want to tell you about the second round. I want to hear that story, Cyan pouted mischievously. Later I want to tell you about Kitty 3, Bruno the Bovinoid. Save that one for later. Cyan grinned. I'm visiting Briar. She likes it rough too. You want a visual of striped little me getting down and dirty with a spotted guy, don't you? Cully accused. Stripes, spots, and rough sex? Cyan grinned. I'm not seeing a downside unless you don't want to get me wet. Let me give you a quick rundown. The event was called Speed Shuffle. It's 5 minutes around. You only have 5 minutes to get your partner off before moving to the next one. Her memories flowed outward, creating visual representations of each object and person she spoke about. The padding was made to be easily cleaned. There was a heavy black curtain around the area with lockers and showers on the other side, but we don't have to care about that now. Do you mind stepping into your narrative so I can feel your memories of it? If you can do that, why didn't you try that with my memory of Ojeran and Aita? Cully asked irritably. I wasn't alone, Cyan blushed brightly. It requires a lot of concentration. Keep in mind I still have a real body to be concerned with. I'm actually in Briar's bedchamber meditating this time. There's no risk of interference or interruption. If she comes to check on me and I'm making strange noises or faces, she'll just use soul touch to check on me. Samari said something about almost being able to feel you while I was touching her with it, so things may get a little weird if Briar touches me while I'm in contact with you. You're hoping she does, aren't you? Cully teased. If there's a way to feel like we're touching without depending on memories of being touched, kissed, caressed, or even probed with that tail trick of yours, well, I'd still rather be there. I swear, Cully grumbled, I'm going to buy you a strap-on. Not allowed, Cyan sighed and rolled her eyes. I'm still unperfected. They banned that decades before the Talshi incident and never looked back. You're unperfected, not me, Cully smirked. I said I was going to buy one for you, not me. Cyan paused. Her eyes went wide as she realized what was actually being proposed. Let me guess, that's on the lamentic I would never list, Cully teased. I swear if you get upset at me for helping you relax like Talshi did because you think it's too submissive. I'd hate to think I've spent all this time practicing with Cho just so you can tell me you don't want my mouth between your thighs. Cully smiled as she waited for Cyan to stop stammering. Kivaza, Cyan said sheepishly, if that's really what you want. Pick out a nice one. Cully smiled. What do you think makes for a nice penis anyway? Cyan wondered aloud playfully. I've only really had the one. Well, that and Talshi's pseudo-penis. That was pretty nice, but it wasn't really a penis, was it? I know it's just a strap-on, but if you tried to picture me with something swinging between my legs, what would it look like? Long, short, thin, thick, flexible, rigid. I just don't know. I'm not allowed to test all the different models. How about you try them out for me and decide what works best on you? Kali giggled uncontrollably. You said the Elysians looked pretty. You can start by telling me about that one. Cyan smiled. Kali struggled to regain her composure. Their body temperature is really low, but it sure was pretty. It was so cold it felt sharp. By the time I got used to it, there just wasn't enough time left to get me off. Kali pouted. I was so close. Actually, I have his contact information. I should see if he's still in the area and try again on my terms. Stop being a tease. Cyan pouted. That's enough foreplay. Just show me. Cyan climbed out of the bedding while holding out her arm to Kali. Kali took her Tejmare by the hand and used her twin tails to guide herself to her feet. Taking measures to offset her body weight had become second nature, even if it was unnecessary within the mindscape. I spent most of the elevator ride trying to get close with a Lampharian guy. Kali blushed. I was just desperate to feel soul touch. I've missed you too, Cyan soothed. The memory of Kali walked toward the desk and seemed to be talking to people just beyond the visible boundaries. Oh, I should skip this. A couple of the girls who saw me drying my tails asked for my help. There was a Lupian, a Rakashan, and a woman I'm pretty sure was actually a Cheshire using a fake ID. Do you think she was too young? Cyan asked. Too Cheshire, Kali chuckled. They're not allowed. She was posing as Shashan. It might seem like discrimination, but... No barbs allowed, Cyan said emphatically. Kali nodded. We were all assigned a desk. The men were assigned a starting order when they were brought in. You're supposed to start off with the closest species to your own. That sounded good to me. I was thinking they'd start me off with the Lampharian guy. Then I could bow out and be done with it. Of course, they didn't know he was closest species. I think they went with closest hair color. Kali smirked. So, they started the violet-haired guy with the pink-haired girl. She kept looking at me while she was screwing him. I thought she was getting herself off by trying to make me jealous. If I seemed distracted, that's why. I found out later how wrong I was. Kali blushed. She was interested in my tails, but it's not supposed to be that kind of event. Not supposed to be? Cyan teased, as Kali skimmed through her memory. Kali's memory echo walked into a room wearing a sheer black knee-length robe that tied around her waist. Her skin was dyed blue and green. She'd stored her Sheiga mask and other personal effects in a locker beyond the visual area. So, it started off black? Cyan snickered. What color was it when you left? I only had sex with half of the guys. And Bruno who was... Yeah, there were a lot of white streaks. Kali smiled. Kali's memory echo sat on the desk with her tails squirming behind her. You look stressed, Cyan said while motioning toward her echo's tails. I was, Kali admitted. I didn't really know what to expect. There were 8 guys and I was only allowed to opt out once. They offered liquid encouragement for the women and a dose of recovery between rounds for the men. 5 minutes really wasn't much time to work with, and that was all the time the guys had to please me. Talking runs down the clock. If they come at me consumed with lust, that's immediate turn off. If they were all hands, that's no good either. There isn't time for wooing. Cyan listened quietly. I mean, what am I supposed to do, sit there with my legs spread yelling come and get it? Kali asked while motioning to her echo's crotch. Cyan stifled a laugh. I felt a little bad for them. They had so little time to entice me into wanting it. Most of the men I'd been with up to this point weren't that good. I had just spent the morning with a sex trainer, followed by a 2-woman Pharisee ride. My expectations weren't very high, Kali smirked, and a procession of sympathy fucks just wouldn't do. How'd you handle it? Cyan snickered. I thought approaching it like a job interview might work, but even running through it in my head. Just no. Sounded too much like a scene in a really bad porno. I decided to ignore the clock and talk to them until I got a feel for them, then decide if I want to let them have a feel of me. Kali sped through her memory and skipped past the time it took the other participants to enter the room. If she didn't bother to mention them, they wouldn't be visible anyway. She cleared her throat and waited for Cyan's psyche to form into her echo as she began narrating the scene. The man standing in front of me hadn't seemed interesting during the elevator ride. Looking at him now, it was clear his appearance was a matter of heredity, not vanity. His skin was closer to the color of sun-bleached bone than to the pearly white of a lamentic. His hair was black and gray like freshly burnt bark, and his eyes were glistening black like volcanic glass, even the scara. He had several slightly darker patches of skin that were closer to a cream color, all of which were below his neck. He took shape as she continued her narration. Hang on, Cyan said urgently as she took a step back from the memory echo. I want to take a closer look at his spots. I know all the major subterran species. There aren't all that many. Champarian, Daeret, Darian, Udbar. Then there's the Samsar, in which are considered a minor species. They account for 5 of the 12 Ark ships which evacuated their ancient home. The Mangani were descendants from one of those ships, Kali continued. There are 6 unconfirmed, but rumor has it, one ship landed on a Lupian world and influenced their cultural development, and Syntholo had discovered another lost tribe, the Ship 12, the E2. They started showing up in the echelon system a little while ago. I know, Kali grinned. It was just a matter of time until the Ishiler scooped up the entire population to make up for the dead Samsaran workforce. I got to them first. I arranged for Gaorun to have them trained before and after. They work for me now. I plan to use them to overthrow the Ishiler. Ambitious, Sion said. The predecessors of the Harashim are from there too. They were called heretics if I recall correctly. Kali shrugged. I thought the man standing before me could be from a species that evolved from one of the 3 undiscovered Ark ships. I'd rather have been sitting down learning about his species, but instead I had this and only 5 minutes of time. They are from one of the last 3 ships, Sion confirmed. I'd never seen or even heard of an Elysian before. I didn't know what I was looking at. All I knew was that I was expected to have sex with him. Apparently he had the same thought, Kali said, then resumed her memory. What are you? He asked just before the countdown finished. I was really relieved that he didn't mind running down the clock with idle conversation, Kali said, then paused. In her memory, Kayla hadn't flipped up his kilt yet, but that wasn't stopping Sion from trying to get a sneak peek. Sion-eyed, Kali scolded. I had to wait. So do you. Fine, I'll wait, Sion grumbled. Just slip into my echo and be patient. Are you sure you don't mind if I experience those memories as you? Sion inquired. Is reliving a memory of penetration forbidden too? Kali mocked. Nope, Sion said, trying to hide her excitement. I think we found another loophole. I'm surprised you haven't tried this before, Kali snickered. Not with my princess, the Cletharian queen, Sion smiled playfully. It had nothing to do with her queen's mark. The thickness of the cord which they shared rivaled the cable which bound Kivaza to Somri. Looking at the other strands connected to her, Sion didn't maintain any other strong bonds, which seemed to be a commonality among Lamentics. Sion once told her that Lamentics don't experience intense emotions. Kali had always associated the thickness of the cords with the strength of the emotions felt. Was she wrong? I'm ready, Sion said. Kali allowed her memory to continue playing out. I was going to ask you that, Kali's echo smiled playfully. A proper answer would take more time than we have. I had my skin dyed before I came here. Is that enough for now? I am Elysian. My species serves another. We are the between, he said. How do you look before you die? The Elysian asked while stepping closer. Bad choice of words, Sion giggled. Kali's echo's black tail sped up between them with her twin tails pulling it back. Her stinger was fully extended. Die skin, he said while holding his hands up as if in surrender. That's better, Sion laughed. Oh, Kali's echo blushed. I'm part Dareth, part Shamfarian and part something else. My skin is black, gold and white. As her black tail relaxed and slithered behind her, Kali's echo's twin tails seemed determined to provide their own apology for the misunderstanding. Her right coiled around his chest while the left tail explored his legs. Kali could feel Sion's consciousness settling in to concentrate on the new sensations. The men were all shirtless and were wearing kilts instead of pants. It was both convenient and provided a nice preview for the ladies. He stepped closer with a little encouragement from her tails. He reached for the belt holding her robe closed, took hold of it and waited. Go ahead, Kali's echo shrugged. Just keep talking and I won't object. Strict consent laws kill the spontaneity, Sion thought. You said you serve another? Kali's echo asked as he pulled her robe open. Yes, we are between, he said as he slowly lowered his hands onto her knees. Not yet, you're not, Sion thought impatiently. His hands were cold. His touch gave her goosebumps. She struggled with the impulse to move away. Are you supposed to feel that cold? Kali's echo asked. And what do you mean between? I work in Terran safe places for Zagal team. I already know this, Sion thought. When does something interesting happen? Can I take a quick peek in your head while I get used to your touch? Kali's echo asked. Why? He asked. I adopted twin Jagaltim boys, Kali's echo said as she relaxed, allowing him to gradually spread her legs as he continued moving toward her. It's difficult to find information about their culture. You're a part of that, so I was hoping it will help me understand the twins better. Oh, hello there, Sion thought. His skin was cold enough that his touch almost felt sharp. Her brown tails continuously coiled around him, attempting to warm him just a little. She felt giggles flowing from Sion's mind. They're both exiles because of a genetic issue, Kali's echo said to answer a concern she felt in his mind. That is kind, he said. Less talking, more action, Sion thought impatiently. Kali's echo gently looked through the Elysian's mind. He worked as a liaison with a Zagalteam tech team that traveled around Corrales optimizing and servicing power reactor cooling systems. Elysians could survive in temperatures as low as -100 degrees, which was the highest safe temperature for genetically normal Zagaltim. The two cultures had lived harmoniously for decades. Less complaining. This was important to me, Kali mentally scolded. Kali's echo was beginning to shiver. Just activate an ability, Cyan thought irritably. Concerned thoughts flashed through his mind. He'd lacked female companionship for quite some time. His low body temperature had been problematic. Wait, Kali's echo said as she pushed him back. I have an idea. I need to focus for a few seconds. I just did, Kali thought to Cyan. Sex with you is like eating really spicy food, Kali's echo said slightly louder than necessary. I'm up to the challenge. I can take it, but I doubt the rest can. Kali's echo stepped forward until they were almost touching and whispered. Just wanted to help your chances with the others. I can cheat. I taught my boys how to resist the heat. One with Mistrionics, the other with Kobe Tamj. I have both and the opposite's just as simple. I'll just double up on cold resistance and leave the rest to you. Are your tales always this aggravating? Cyan asked mentally as she noticed the fundamental disconnect between her echo's brain and tails. They seemed determined to warm him up, even though she knew this was his normal body temperature. They don't always listen to me, Kali thought back. That's why I didn't object when you tied up my tails our first night together. I wanted to start off right, Cyan thought to her. I'm unperfected. I spent a good chunk of my life being valued for what was between my legs. I wanted. No, needed. More. Well, in that case, maybe we should stop the story here before the unveiling, Kali thought teasingly. Don't you dare. Cyan's thoughts felt serious yet playful. Kali continued forward through the memory. Her echo leaned forward, pulled up the bottom of his kilt and let it fall behind his erect penis. Seeing his genitals completely exposed startled her. In one regard he looked far more alien to her. Unlike so many other species, he didn't have a dangling ball holder ruining the aesthetic. His testicles being located further inside his body should have been an obvious adaptation, but she hadn't given it a thought. Right where his lower abdomen passed the shaft of his penis, there was a slight bulge on either side. Kali reached forward with both hands. The tissue cradling his shaft was puffy with firm musculature underneath. Using the muscles in there, he could hold it in place, firmly against his body, or release it, lowering it like a drawbridge. There was a gentle arch to his length from where it laid against the bulge. Wait, Cyan thought, but it was a moment before Kali halted the playback. Have you changed your mind? He asked. Sorry, Kali's echo giggled. I got distracted. I've never seen one that looks pretty before. Cyan stepped away from the memory echo to take a closer look. It's interesting, Cyan said. It looks like puffy labia with a dick sticking out. Your idea of a pretty penis looks like it should be on a woman. I hadn't thought about that until now, but yeah, scrotums are really unattractive. They're all wrinkly. They just hang there with a few hairs sticking out. They're just. Kali grimaced. Cyan chuckled softly. No balls. So that's why you like Ojeran. Well, they're internal, Kali blushed, but he does have them. Back to the Elysian, Kali changed the subject. We only started with 5 minutes. I remember being concerned about the amount of time we already used up. I was curious but not particularly aroused. Even if it was pretty, Cyan laughed. I don't mind being seen without my clothes on, but having sex where everyone can see me, judge me, especially after all that stuff with Jax. I just had to stop myself thinking about it long enough to let it happen. I liked his bone-colored skin even if his eyes were a distraction. I couldn't tell where he was looking. But there was that. Kali sighed deeply while motioned toward his crotch. It really was pretty, like the graceful slope of the horn of some animal hung in a trophy case. Did you want it in your trophy case? Cyan chided. Oh yeah, Kali said breathily while blushing brightly. She advanced the memory a few seconds. Should I use this to please myself? Kali's echo said while attempting to sound sultry while shivering. Not my finest moment, Kali snickered. Cyan stifled a laugh. It took a bit of experimentation with my cold resistance, but it was around this point our skin temperatures finally began to equalize. He noticed the change too, Kali said with a smile as she let her memory play out a little further. He stepped up against her echo and breathed as much as said, I want to take you. Wait for me, Cyan said as she rushed to merge her consciousness back into the memory echo. Kali continued the narrative while her Tejmare got situated. I told him I don't have nipples or a clit and warned him not to waste his time looking. Then I said. Kali waited until Cyan finished immersing herself in the memory before continuing. I'm yours until the timer sounds. Do whatever you'd like, Kali's echo said with a smile. Whatever I want, he said lasciviously as he stepped forward again, his cock wedged between them as he squeezed her ass nearly to the point of discomfort while pinning her legs against the desk. Be careful with your words. I may believe them. That made a world of difference, Cyan's mind teased. Have you finally lost interest in being analytical? Kali's echo wrapped her arms around him and whispered in his ear. I'm more durable than you are hard. Spanking's good, but be careful, real aggression turns me on. Just don't take it too far. You don't want to get stung. I'll have to remember that. Cyan's thoughts were gentle like a caress. Kali's echo was light on her feet. Her arms and legs were deceptively slender. A normal Terran with her build would probably weigh around 90 pounds, but her body was incredibly dense. She hadn't been eating well lately and suspected her weight had fallen below 250. She always looked a bit too spindly for her liking whenever she dropped below 270. About 40 of that was just from her increased bone density. His attempts to pick her up had failed miserably. Cyan's outrage toward Kaylani threatened to shatter Kali's concentration. She had just noticed how much weight Kali had lost during her imprisonment. I know, Kali struggled to soothe her psyche. She moved her memories forward, hoping the words she'd spoken next would reach her Techmare. I'm almost as strong as my boys, Kali's echo grinned playfully. Guide me, don't lift me. We've decided to play rough, Kali thought to Cyan, mirroring the thought her echo had sent to the event coordinator. Please don't intervene unless I ask you to. Cyan slowly seemed to settle back in the memory. Either her words or the distraction had helped. Kali wasn't sure which. How aggressive can you handle? He said as he gripped her hips firmly and guided her forward and back and from one side to the other. Her feet moved effortlessly following his movements. He stood quietly blinking in disbelief. Kali explained before Cyan had opportunity to inquire. I pushed a few flashes through his mind showing him the aftermath of my sexual encounter with Syntholo. It started with a pretty brutal fight and ended, well, let's just say with a big surprise. Just try not to scare the others. Kali's echo grinned slyly as she relaxed her muscles and swayed under the firm guidance of his hands. Do your worst and make it your best. Feel free to try these lines on me sometime, Cyan thought longingly. He pulled her in close and started kissing her. This wasn't at all the sort of aggressiveness she expected. He was a good kisser despite the coolness of his lips and tongue. He wrapped his right arm around her, holding her tight, kissing her deeply. Kali's echo eased into his embrace. This wasn't what she wanted or expected, but it was nice. Cyan's mind was silent. The sting of his left palm slapping her ass rang through the room. Harder, Kali's echo groaned happily. She wasn't sure, but for a moment she thought she heard. No, couldn't be. He hit her again, harder this time. She moaned at the stinging sensation. Did Cyan just? Kali parted her lips and leaned back away from him. He switched his arm position as she turned the other cheek. I really hope that's not all you've got, she taunted. Whack. What? He spanked her 3 times with his right hand, each time harder than the last. Cyan's voice added to the choir as Kali's echo moaned louder with each strike, to encourage him to continue. He traced his nails down her back and slapped her again. Cyan held her ground while moaning softly within Kali's echo. She rested her face against his chest as he feverishly searched between her legs. Can Cyan really feel that, or is she just experiencing my memory? Kali's echo flicked her tails behind herself as she angled her hips away from him. She was trying to provoke him further. She lost her balance as he stepped back abruptly, grabbed her shoulder, spun her using her own momentum to his advantage, shoved her with his hand between her shoulder blades, slapped her ass with one hand then the other, then drove her upper body down onto the top of the desk. Cyan moaned in response to him slapping Kali's echo's ass, as well as her impacting with the desktop. He definitely felt that. He rammed his hips against her ass, his cock forcing itself through between her thighs, then held her down with his hand on the small of her back as he gripped the base of her tails with his other hand. Cyan gasped while Kali's echo gritted her teeth. His alignment had been wrong. He pulled her tails upward as he moved his hips away from her until the tip of his slightly curved dick was lined up the gateway to pleasure. Kali's echo desperately wanted him to penetrate. He slammed into them, driving as deeply within them as he could reach. They shuddered and groaned as his hips slapped against their ass. Kali wasn't sure when it had happened, but Cyan was no longer just observing a past event. She was participating. Cyan and Kali's echo both pushed back. It felt almost like he was hopping, although she wasn't entirely sure what he was doing back there. She'd prefer longer strokes within her, but she was enjoying it just the same. Each time he drove deeper into her, he pulled against the base of her tails while slamming his hips into her with such ferocity she felt like she was being lifted off the table. He was going too fast. She could feel his muscles beginning to contract. Sorry, I tried to warn you, Kali thought sadly. Don't you dare come yet, Kali's echo hissed as she clamped down the muscles within her, trying to prevent his escape. His semen was certainly warmer than his dick, but that wasn't what Kali's echo wanted. She didn't want to feel the rumbling of it flowing out into her. Either cyanide had fallen out of sync with her echo, or this was exactly the sensation she yearned for. Kali's echo wanted more. Cyan slowly withdrew her consciousness as Kali's echo wiggled her hips back and forth. Felt copious. He'd definitely gotten his, but she wasn't even close to done. She was just starting to really get into him getting into her. I forgot what that felt like, Cyan thought wistfully. Coordinator, Kali's echo whimpered pitifully, can you get him some blue? Quickly. That's for between rounds, they answered. Kali remembered feeling like she was about to cry. It wasn't fair. It was just getting good. Cyan and Kali's psychic projections stood together as the last of the memory played out. Turn around, he said while giving her echo a quick pop on the behind. Well, that was interesting, Cyan said. Kali's echo pulled herself forward and sighed as he slid out of her. I was so close, Kali sighed. I know, Cyan blushed. I could feel it too. Damn it, Kali's echo said angrily as she rolled over onto her back. We're finding a way to exchange information. I want to try this again sometime. Have you? Cyan asked. I did get his information, but no, we haven't. Why not? Cyan asked as the scene began to fade. What would I do? Kali laughed. Tell him I'm calling to have him sent to check my cooling system personally? Cyan giggled. Make sure to tell him your radiator's been running really hot. You said you could feel it, Kali said in an attempt to change the subject. You sounded like it felt like more than just a memory. Yeah, it was pretty intense and twice as surreal, Cyan said dreamily. It reminded me of that time we went jogging through the woods. When our pace, pulse, even the sound of our footfalls fell into sync. I think it was like that. It better not be some kind of extreme range telekinetic ability. I'd hate to think you've been holding out on me all this time. I'd teach it to you so we could hold each other before going to sleep, Kali smiled. Just hold. Cyan grinned slyly. Kali bit her lower lip and her tail squirmed restlessly. Cyan glanced to the side and said, Hey, I need to go take care of something. Have to go. Tell me when the conference is over. I will, Kali smiled. Make sure Briar gives you an extra hug for me. Cyan's presence was gone. Kali sighed as she returned through the door leading into the primary mindscape, this time without her rabbit. They'd managed to reach a compromise while she was away, and all it had taken was the threat of global devastation. Under the amended agreement, the other fellowship nations would jointly aid in the reconstruction of 2 sites on Nirvana that were sacred to Kalmia, and make allowances for occasional pilgrim fleets. Section break. Once the meeting was adjourned, Kali accompanied Navari to the exit. Bajaran had been sent on some mission that was 2 jump days away. Navari also cautioned her that an Urinarax named Kishiraku had been spotted in the region. He rated 3rd among the assassins in Corrales. She didn't know if he was here on assignment or who had sent him. Navari had mentioned it as a courtesy. Bruno was at work and Satocho had left her a message that she was out and wouldn't be back until late. Kali smirked. That was useless. The hotel sounded like a great idea until she realized how empty it felt when everyone else was away. Everything that had once been in the special containment area was still in the penthouse, which they talked about turning into a communal living area. Everyone else had claimed a room to call their own. He still hadn't. She reached out with her psyche to let Cyan know the meeting was over. She spent some time wandering around the hotel, trying to decide which room to claim for herself. There were 15 floors other than the penthouse, which took up the entirety of the 16th floor. Each regular floor was composed of 10 rooms. The ceilings were high enough for most species classified as size 2. Fortunately, Bruno's horns were curved, otherwise he'd be relegated to the penthouse and normally public areas. Once they decided on all the updates, they planned on using the building to provide free housing to downtrodden citizens and visitors stranded in the system. But for now she was the only one here. They hadn't even taken time to hire any staff yet. The glass was mirrored for privacy. Kali smiled playfully to herself. This was a rare opportunity. Why was she bothering to wear clothing? She headed to the bar and draped her clothes over the counter. It was a liberating feeling knowing she had the building all to herself and everything inside it belonged to her. Her tails dragged lazily behind her as she pulled a snifter glass from under the counter and looked on the top shelf to select a bottle for herself. The hotel went out of business overnight. They may have sold off the more valuable vintages before locking up, but that was decades ago. She settled on a bottle of Old Terran whiskey and poured herself a drink. It felt warm going down and would take some getting used to. She left the glass on the counter and decided to do a little exploring. The chandelier by the main entry didn't look like it would hold her, but the banisters were fun. I wonder if they fixed the pool yet, Kali wondered aloud. They hadn't. It had been drained and cleaned, but it wasn't ready yet. She'd spent too much time focused on the soaking tub in the penthouse. If she wanted to get the hotel ready, she desperately needed to prioritize. Do we look open? Kali snickered as she heard someone knocking on the door. After a pause they knocked again, louder this time. We haven't even decided on a name, Kali grumbled as she made her way to the lobby. Nobody told her they were expecting a morning delivery. She saw a man wearing a work uniform, wearing mirrored glasses, and holding a digital clipboard standing a respectable distance from the front doors. He took a step forward, knocked again, then stepped back and checked his paperwork. Kali walked to the door and flipped the locking switch. It occurred to her that she was still naked an instant after she opened the door. To someone who didn't know better, she'd look like she was wearing furry bikini bottoms. Despite not having nipples, her twin brown tails rushed to cover her. I am Z-Tech. The pale-skinned man sounded confused as he read off his electronic clipboard. Work order says you need me check cooling system. Is running too hot. Is confusing. It says you ask for me, but Z-Tech systems do not have radiators. Wearing his uniform and mirrored glasses, she didn't recognize the Elysian until he spoke. Either he hadn't looked up yet, didn't recognize her without the skin dye, or suspected she was playing a joke on him. She was the one who answered the door naked. I'll get her for this, Cully whispered as her tails fell away from her breasts and she held open the door for him. Just come in. Tails, yes, he said in surprise. This is you not died. No, not today, Cully giggled. Many question. He asked hesitantly, do people I work with make joke? Or is joke someone else's? Listen, I was telling a friend of mine about our event at NIM and how you ran out of time just before. Why am I explaining all this to you? My friend's right. I do talk too much. I want a rematch. Want to fuck? Cully asked. I am still on the clock, he said with concern. Fine, then do you mind getting paid for having sex with me? She said before realizing the implications. She blushed and added, yeah, really right now. He didn't say no.